In this video, what I'd like to do is take our basic application, which was an empty activity. So if I run it just for us to remind us where we've got to, and give it a second just to load up the emulator. If you remember, all it had was, there we go, hello world with a bar at the top. Now, what I'd like to do is introduce a very simple way of adding a button and changing the text in here. In order to do that, that will teach you one of the basic techniques of working with Android Studio, how you use string resources, which are over here, and how you bind these two files together. So you add something to your activity main, which is your XML interface, which looks like this if you press on the text view, that if you press on the design view, and then we need to wire in some code to handle a click, which we'll put in the main activity. Now, this video is all about just changing a bit of text or something on the actual form. In subsequent videos, we will show you how to switch activities as well. So let's begin. The very first thing I want to do is if I go to my activity main and I have my hello world, and you'll notice it has these lines coming off it. What it allows you to do is actually position your text wherever you want and make sure it doesn't slip around. These, we'll have a go in a second. I've clicked on this, and prior to running the video, I added the ID attribute text view 1. Now, that will become clear why I need that a bit later, but if I don't have that, I can't get access to that particular text view. I need an ID for it. And when you run the M2 project, it often starts with that one. So put text view 1 in the ID when you click on that. Now, the other thing to notice is that if you scroll down the attributes, you'll notice the text itself is typed straight into here. This is not a recommended approach. In fact, if I dangle my mouse over, it'll say, but you might not be able to read this, hard-coded string should use a string resource. So this is one of the purposes of this particular instruction. So we're going to go over to the strings XML file and double-click it. When we double-click it, hopefully the font is big enough for you to read. We have a string. This is the application name. And what we're going to do is we're going to add two strings. One string, I'll do it as I explain it. It's going to be a string. The name of this string is, let's call it pre-click. So this is before you click your button. And the text is going to say, please, he says, if he can type, please click the button. Okay, then let's add another string. And this string is the string that's going to change. So this is, we're going to call this clicked button. Okay, we're going to name the string that, close that tag, and then in here say you clicked the button with an exclamation mark. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do now, I have a pre-click and a click button. I'm not going to hard code strings into my interface. So I've created that. The text, these elements of text will be given in a snippets file if you can't follow it, which I will attach to Moodle so you can copy and paste that in to test this out and try it out yourselves. So let's continue, go back to activity main, come back to my hello world text view, and when you click on it, all the attributes open up over here, and instead of the text hello world, I'm going to delete that, and there's a little sort of horizontal rectangle and a little pop-up says pick a resource. I'm going to click on that and it opens up this resource window. So I go in here and that's the name of the string. It's called pre-click, and that's the text, please click the string. So I'm going to select that. So now, I don't know if you noticed it expand. It should now read, please click the text, the button below. So let's just run that to see that on the actual emulator and get into the habit. This is what it looked like before. It said hello world. It's building at the moment. Give it a second. and it's building. 0 errors, build, and there we go. Please click the button. Okay, that's the string based on the string resource. I don't have to shut the emulator down, I just click off it. There's no point in hitting the red button over here and stopping the app. All you have to do when you want to rerun it is either Shift F10 or hit this arrow and it'll rerun it. If you have a major error, then you might want to shut it down, rebuild it and all that, but really you should try to minimize that. It creates a big overhead. Right, so I need a button. So I come over, remember I'm in design view, in text view, so you can see the text, the line looks like that. And what it has is an at string, so it means go to the string resources and find the string named pre-click. That's what's going to sit inside it. So that's inside the text view. Just so you know what the XML is behind it. Let's click back to design. Let's grab a button and drag a button on. And at the moment, what you'll notice straight away is that the little warnings come up, not horizontally constrained. Now you notice I popped it there on the middle of the page, but if I run it without constraining it, you'll understand what this constraint issue is. Let's run it and see what it does. You will notice, or what you should notice when it runs, give it a moment, is that it suddenly ends up in the top left-hand corner, although in my design it's sitting there in the middle. Now this is a really powerful feature of Android Studio interface design. You can position stuff and it will be there, but why is it not there in this version? Because I haven't actually limited or fixed this, constrained it. Now you notice there are 4 big circles around the side. If you hold down on one and drag upwards, it'll drag the whole button up, but if you put it back, what it does is it creates a constraint. Let's do that again. Right, there we go. And you'll notice there's a number which appears on the constraint widget over here. You can do it 2 ways. You can click that by clicking that plus button and then giving it a distance, but it's easier to drag it across and position it. There we go. So we've got 2 constraints. So in theory, that should keep it roughly in that position. To test it's actually constrained and it's not going to move around. Click run, have a quick look and make sure the button appears where you expect it. Now this is going to take a big part of your development. So, oops, it's right down here. That's because the distance across the bottom is 160 and the distance on the top is 340. Actually, what I want to do is put it right there in the middle of the screen. So I should actually go to the other side and constrain it. Right. And I should go down to the bottom and constrain it. Now I have much better and more precise positioning of it. Right, so let's just run that. And see what that looks like. Is that appearing in the middle of the screen? Now you can spend as much, not quite, because actually what I've done is haven't constrained it correctly. The constraint is a jagged line, like a scribble line. These are just measurement lines. They don't actually constrain it. So what you really need to do is, if you look down here, start, end, top is 332, bottom needs to be increased, vertical bias. So you need to do a little bit more work. Wait a second, let's just get that constraint into operation and get it working. There we go, that's the right one. Now you notice it's and the one at the top wasn't quite constraining it. Let's get that in, and now you notice it's got all around it 4 of these kind of squiggly lines. Now it will be where you expect it to be. My point here is that once you get used to it, it's very, very powerful and you can start. Let's run it, let's have a quick look and check that it sits where I expect it to sit. There we go. Okay, so now this shows you how you can really carefully constrain and locate and position things on your screen. One consequence of this is that if you are building for a different size screen, you need to know how to resize your screen so everything fits neatly. That's an issue that you can explore later. My instinct is to choose a simple emulator and stay with it all the way through, because for the purposes of your assessment, I'm not asking you to test against different screen sizes. Okay, so I've got a button. It's got the word button on it, and it is positioned in the middle. It's got, if I click on the button, it's got a name. It's called button 2, and it's got, I think, a text which says button. Okay, so the text above it says please click below, and there's button. Now you can replace that text with images, with all kinds of different stuff. What we're actually interested in doing is what happens when you click that button. Now you see it's highlighted over in the common attributes. There's an on click link. In the drop down, nothing appears because so far I have no code anywhere in this Android application for this to execute when I run it. Now this is my activity main, and activity main is already linked to main activity, this Java file. So it's in the Java file which corresponds to that particular activity that I need to locate my code. Now, again, this is going to require potentially confusing theory. You have this word protected or public. For a button, I've been asked to use the word public. Now, when you say I've been asked, what you will find is if you linger your mouse over, you will find it often will advise you of what that should be. But for the time being, just take my word for it. It's a public void. It's not returning anything. I'll give it the name, my name, so a name I want. On click handler. This is a general term for a piece of code which responds to an event on the interface, a handler. But I need something in my single brackets. And what I need is something called the view, capital V, space, then you do a lowercase view. Now, what you'll notice straight away is it'll highlight and say, cannot resolve symbol view. You have to import Android dot, and you'll see there is view, and actually it's the other way around. It should be a capital V. Sorry, not capital V. Bear with me a second. View and a view object. It's a bit peculiar, right? Now, what you do is you have a lowercase view after Android, then an uppercase view, and then you notice that it recognizes it. Now, the logic of an import is that this is a library, and to use that library and the facilities, I need to have the right import statement. This should be familiar from Java. What I've done is I've had an open curly bracket and a closed curly bracket. So in here, I'm going to place my code, the stuff that's going to happen when I click that button. Before I put any code in there, what I want to do is take that handler and wire it to the button. So go back to my interface and look over here where I have on click. And what I'm hoping will happen is when I click and look for code which will handle this click, suddenly it appears under main activity on click handler. Now what this tells you is that you can have multiple handlers depending on what you want your thing to do. It specifies the file main activity and the handler. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to execute it just to make sure there are no errors, and click my button. It shouldn't do anything, right? There's the button. Shouldn't do anything. Certainly shouldn't have crashed. Give me a second. Oh, hasn't run yet. Hasn't installed. There we go. It's there. Right. At the moment, the code doesn't do anything. What I want to do is when I click that button, it's going to change that text. So that's a simple way of wiring your interface to a piece of Java code. Notice I wrote that, I gave it the name onClick handler. The word public and protected you might get confused about. Sometimes it asks for public, sometimes for protected. Generally default to protected, but it sometimes won't see it, so you'll have to switch it to public. So what code do I want to put in here? Now, if you remember earlier, I said that for my text view, I added an ID. What I'm going to try to do is grab that text view and using the strings, put the string into it. So let's do that. Now, the very first thing I want to do is I will switch to my snippet and show you what the code looks like on a snippet. So there it is in front of me. Let's maximize it so you can see. what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a variable called a text view inside my onClick handler. I cast whatever what this will do is find view by ID. It's a way of accessing your interface. Okay, so you run this to access your interface. The capital R means resources, and it hunts for IDs. I called it text view 1, so that should grab it, that resource, and then it will convert it, make sure that it's received as a text view. Once I get hold of it as a text view, I can then manipulate it. So look at the line underneath. I'm going to, on text view, which I've shortened to TV, is to set the text. But how do I know what string I want to put in there? And what I want to do is I call a function called getResources, which is another way of accessing the resources. Get the string, and in string I specify the resource. So it's the resource folder, string folder, clicked button, named string. Okay, now that's quite obscure, but if you stick to the routine, you'll find you'll get used to this way of linking it all together. So I'm going to copy that back in. Now the first thing you'll notice is it can't resolve text view. So there's one way around it, and that is, instead of up here where you have a view, if you put an asterisk, what it should allow you to do, bear with me a second. It's a different type of object, yes. Sorry, ignore that. You don't change it to an asterisk. Let's get the view back. Text view is what's called a widget. So you have to actually import android.widget. And if I do widget star, that should allow all the widgets, all the text views, the image views, the buttons, and so on, accessible inside of my code. Right, so now it's all accessible. It's going to replace it with the string which says click button. If I go to strings XML, click button says you click the button. So, theory, all that effort just simply to click a button. So let's just run it and see if it works or it crashes. So it is just installing button. So it says please click the button, you click the button. Now, I'm stopping there because what I want to try to draw your attention to is that we are staying on a single user interface, but we're using events on the user face to change other things on that user interface. And this shows you the most common way of changing text on an interface. What you will find when you get into Android Studio is that the number of Java lines of code will never be huge unless you're going to add databases and do much, much more complex lines of code. But what you will find is that it's quite repetitive, which is a good thing. It'll help reinforce the basic relationships. And it throws very good and clear errors. When it has an error inside the code, it often advises you. I think there was one there. So let me stop the video there. Encourage you to follow this video step by step. Use the snippets file to copy code in if you forget how to type it, or forget what it actually looks like, and test it for yourself and run it.